How's it going, everyone? It's Sam. I want to talk to you about how to trade for the second half of this bull market cycle. Like we in some people's minds have already made a massive move up, a 4x from the bottom, and we're kind of at the halfway point. Some people think the market's done, that we're going to fall down from here. But generally, sentiment has turned much more positive since we went from 53,000 up to 64,000. There are a variety of reasons for that, which I want to talk about in this video, but then talk about really what should we be looking for to make a lot of money during this next phase of the market? How can we use leverage to help that? How can we use it to amplify the kinds of returns that we want, right? How can we get a 5 or 10x? In another video, I'll talk about how to get like 20, 50x's, really large gains from this. But let's start here. If you don't mind, hit subscribe, turn on the bell notification so you can see future videos like this one. There's going to be a link to MargX underneath the video in case you want to trade cryptocurrency using leverage. You can use that link. They're also doing an airdrop, so just use that link, hit join now, and you can get some free tokens just for trading on the platform. And we'll be talking about MargX here today because there's some interesting things that you can do on MargX that you can't do on other platforms. So let's just start here. Miles the Shooter got a ton of attention from this thread. He says, in my 6 years in crypto, there's only one. This is one of the most bullish setups I've ever seen. I've covered this in 1 or 2 videos so far, but let's just go through again some of the major catalysts happening right now. First of all, this is kind of like a reduction of a bad catalyst. The German government has run out of Bitcoin. Like, this is just a good reminder. If there's some big amount of Bitcoin that's being sold, whether it's Mt. Gox or a government, it runs out. There's only so much that they can sell. Same thing with GBTC, right? There's a lot of grayscale Bitcoin trust selling, but there's only so much that can be sold. Overall, the ETF inflows remain strong. The US presidential election shows that Trump has a 70% chance of winning. Some people are actually saying that Trump is going to announce a USA Bitcoin strategic reserve in Nashville. So, I mean, those are just rumors going on right now, but that's kind of insane if that happens. And I'm going to actually add a couple of my own catalysts to this list here in a second, but Trump is also speaking at the 2024 conference. That will be interesting. FTX is going to repay a bunch of creditors at the end of the year, and a lot of this money probably will go back into crypto. Global liquidity cycle is on an upwards trajectory, which means that more money flows into crypto usually. ETFs are going live, like the Spot ETH ETF soon. Goldman Sachs is launching tokenization projects. A lot of big companies actually are. A lot of countries are using crypto now. It just came out that China and Russia are using stable coins to get around sanctions. Rate cuts are most likely happening end of the year, maybe September even. And markets are forward looking over the coming months. You're likely to see market prices the market price in these tailwinds. I'd also add a lot of companies have started to add Bitcoin to their balance sheet. We've seen 3 or 4 publicly listed companies that are doing that. That's outside of like the Bitcoin miners. We're also seeing a lot of billionaires start posting about Bitcoin. You know, like all across the world, all different kinds of billionaires are posting about Bitcoin. Mark Cuban just said that Bitcoin can become a safe haven globally. Okay, that's interesting. Simon Dixon points out what I said earlier, that Trump may announce a USA Bitcoin strategic reserve. He's already talked about this, and he says that he wants to get to Bitcoin before China. And apparently, the largest bank in China is saying that Bitcoin's better than gold. Why would they say that unless they're getting ready for something? So we have all these tailwinds. This sets up the second half of the market cycle. Okay, this sets up the point where there's going to be a lot of good news that comes out that pushes the price higher. People start buying heavier. It seems like we're never going to fall down. And then inevitably, we will go through another bear market, most likely. There's always the question of whether Bitcoin continues on forever. But even in some of the most steady markets, like the S&P 500, it still goes through regular corrections. Now, maybe it's not 80% like Bitcoin, but it's 20 or 30%. So I'd still be ready for that with Bitcoin. But keep this in mind, like this is actually still pretty early. typically in the cycle, like the last 3 cycles, we have not seen an all-time high this early after the halving. Like typically we'd see it in a couple more months. We'd see a new all-time high for the first time. We saw an all-time high 3 months before the halving, or 2 months before the halving. So we are a little bit left translated, meaning that we are hitting new all-time highs earlier than we typically do in a cycle for Bitcoin. So I'd just be ready for this. Usually we end the cycle about, 14 months from here? 15 months, something like that. Usually we end it about a year and a half after the Bitcoin halving. So that would give us, another 15 months or so. Now, how do you approach this? How do you make a lot of money? Well, obviously, if you have bought Bitcoin at the bottom or towards the bottom, there's a lot of time to buy Bitcoin. Actually, at that time, you could have made a lot of money. Like you would just be at 4x now. Let's say Bitcoin goes up to $150,000. You would get a 10x, basically. So that's great. But what if you're buying now? What if you want to add to positions now? What if you want to increase exposure? Well, keep in mind that previously, when we had passed the all-time high, so back in, let's just look at the last cycle, right? We had passed the all-time high for Bitcoin back in 2020 compared to 2017. So 2.5 years later, 3 years later, we passed the all-time high. It's actually 3 years later. We passed the all-time high, and then we went from 20,000 up to 64,000. Okay. So we've already passed the all-time high now, as I said, but we're pretty much right at it now. We're at 63,000, so we're pretty close. If we have another move up that's equivalent to the last cycle, that would put us around 200,000. Now, whether you think it's going to be less or slightly more, I don't really care. I'm just showing you're not going to get insanely rich from a 3x. That's just how it works, right? If you buy Bitcoin right now and we get a 3x, that's a really good return, but you're not going to make insane gains. If you're looking to make a 5 or 10x, 15x, you're not going to get it in Bitcoin, most likely this cycle. Now, maybe over the next couple of years, maybe over the next 5, 10 years, maybe you'll get that 5 or 10x, right? Maybe you'll get even more than that. It's hard to know right now, but you're not going to get that probably this year. If you want a higher return, let's say you want, we're talking about how to trade this next cycle. I think if you're looking for a 5 or 10x, you have to look at alts or you have to use leverage. Now, I do like using leverage, to be clear. There is risk in it, just like there's risk in buying altcoins. If you use it properly, it can work to your advantage. So the reason I say this is I put in some longs right around here, right? Like right when we were towards the bottom. And the reason for that was I knew that we had strong support around 53,000. Okay, we had strong support because we had seen resistance, meaning the price moved up, hit these levels, went down, and then came back up. So typically, if we see resistance, we also see support when we move, or if we come back down and touch it. So we were at 57,000, right? I saw we had support at 53,000. I also saw that we had support around 50,000 as well. It's a key psychological level, and we had also seen support here. Then I also knew that we had seen some resistance around 48 to 49K. So again, if we break 53, if we break 50, we probably have some support at 48. So for me, being that we were at 57,000, I knew that if I put in a low leverage long, I most likely would be okay, right? So for example, I put in a 12x long at about 57,000, and that means that I had a liquidation price that was under this $53,000 mark, right? Where I thought we would see more support. Now, on some other platforms too, I put in a position that was a little bit lower leverage, and let's just say I opened it at 59,000, right? Or 60,000. A 5x leverage long would mean that my liquidation point would be around 47, 48K, which means we had the 53,000 support, the $50,000 support, the $48,000 to $49,000 support. We'd have to break all of those before I got liquidated. Now, I do that actually a good amount where I put my leverage based on prior supports, and sometimes I don't even put stop losses because I purposely use leverage that is below the support levels. And like, you don't want to put it right below. Like, let's say we have strong support 50,000. You don't want to put it at 49,990. You want it to be like 49,000 or something like that, because sometimes it wicks right below to get those liquidations or just hunt for stop losses. So that's kind of how I approach it. Now you can do the same thing right now. Okay, we're at 63,000. If you think, okay, we have some strong support around 53,000, you could do something like a 4x long, right? And that would put you about 15,000 down, which would mean you would have support, or you would get liquidated around, let's say 48K, something like that, 47K. But you can also do this in a much more aggressive sense. Like you could go down to the 5 minute, the 1 minute, and do similar things where, okay, we have some support around, let's say 63K. We're at 63.4. You could go on a 20x leverage, and you would know that, okay, I have a liquidation point around 61K. We've been bouncing around 62, 63K, so I'm probably okay. We'll probably make a move right back up to 65K, which is what we've seen in the past. Let's just scroll out here. So we've seen a couple drops down to maybe 62.4, and then we move back up to 66. So you could play it like that. Another thing you could do is you could look at altcoins. Okay, so Ethereum, after it passed its all-time high back in 2021, right? It took a little bit longer than Bitcoin, but passed its all-time high back in 2021 compared to 2018. So 3 years later, passed its all-time high, went on about to do a 3.5x after that. So a little bit more than Bitcoin, right? Yeah, a little bit more than Bitcoin. Bitcoin did just about a 3.2x or something like this. This did a 3.5x. Very similar though returns, more from the bottom to the top. So if you think, okay, we're still not at the all-time high now. Let's say we do another 3x after we hit the all-time high. That would put it around 15,000. I'm not so sure we're going to get to 15,000 to be clear. But let's say we did that. Well, you'd have about a 4.5x left. If you went on, 5x leverage, 10x leverage, obviously you just multiply that by the leverage, and then you get a pretty big return. Now, of course, when you go with altcoins, they're more volatile. Like recently, we double tapped 2,800. We're $500 up from there. So you have to be ready for some more volatility. I do think it makes sense though. I mean, even like this, like ADA did quite well in 2017, 2018. It went up to 40 cents, then went all the way down to 2 pennies. So it went down 95%. And then from there it did 150x, more than 150x return. I'm not the biggest fan of ADA, but if you are, you could do that again and try to play that so that, maybe it's $8, $10. I know some people, they're bullish in the space, say that. Well, a $4 ADA, just getting a little bit higher than it was at the previous peak, that's a 10x. So there are ways of getting really high returns. You just have to be able to stomach that volatility and make sure that you probably place your longs so that you can have stop losses or your liquidation points are below prior support levels. I think that's very key because there's going to be volatility. And then also you do want to take some profit, right? If you're up 500%, you can take a partial profit. If you're up 50%, 100%, maybe you want to take partial profit. It depends on where you think it's going to go right now though too. Like right now, I'm up 130% on a Bitcoin long. But I also know that we're just at 63.5. We still have a lot further to go to even get up to the 66,000 we were at recently, and to get up to 72, 73,000. There's still a lot of room to run. One other thing you can do to get outsized returns is you can use a different form of collateral, like this, right? I opened up a 12x Bitcoin long, but I use Solana as my collateral. Now, I did this on July 4, so let's look at Solana's price. So Solana's price on June 4 was let's call it right around 130, right? So it was around 130, 135, then went down to 120. Let's call it 130. Since then, Solana moved up to 155. So it's up 20% basically. Bitcoin's price at 63.5 versus, let's call it 54,000, is up 17.5%. So I used Solana as the underlying collateral. That means that I get paid back in Solana. Now, a lot of people use USDT. So if I, let's just think about this for a second. If I had used USDT as my underlying collateral for this trade, right? If I'd used USDT, I would be up 132%, but it would be priced in USDT. Okay, so right when I put this trade in, it was around a $250 trade times 130, which is a 2.3x. I'd have $575 of USDT. That's pretty good, right? That's an awesome trade. But instead, I used Solana as collateral. So I used 2 Solana. Each of them were worth about 130 at the time, which means it was about a $260 position. Now I have 4.6 Solana. Okay, 4.6, and the collateral has gone up too. So now I have $713 instead of that $575. So I use different collateral that would increase more than Bitcoin if we moved up, right? I thought Solana most likely will run a little bit harder than Bitcoin. It will definitely run harder than USDT. There's some added risk, I suppose, too, right? If I had, let's say I had closed the trade and I closed it because Bitcoin went down another 5% or so, and then Solana went down 10%. Well, then my Solana would be worth less in USD terms, but most likely I was just going to hold on to the Solana anyways as Solana. So instead, I used this. Let's say it keeps on running, and I get a 3x, or I get a 300% gain, so a 4x on my underlying $260. So it was actually $260. So instead of $10,000, or instead of $1,040, if I get a 300% gain on the Solana, let's say Solana goes and, I don't know, it increases a little bit more, right? Maybe it goes up to $200, $220. So I get my 2 Solana times 4x. So I'd have 8 Solana. That Solana is now worth 220, let's say. That'd be 1,760. So it just amplifies your returns. Of course, it depends on the asset and what the collateral asset does too. But it is fascinating to see how different forms of collateral can increase your gains. And a lot of people don't know that this is even possible because they don't use something like Margex. Most platforms know that this is out there, but I've talked to other exchanges and they said that's just not a priority for them. I don't know why, because this seems like something that a lot of people use from what I can see. A lot of people use this when they use Margex. They'll use different forms of collateral, and you can make it simple, right? Maybe you just want to use Bitcoin on your Bitcoin trades. Maybe you want to trade XRP and you want to use XRP as your collateral instead of USDT. Maybe you have a bunch of XRP and you don't like it, so you want to trade it and maybe just make some more and then you'll cash out, or you don't really care about it. So, there are different ways of thinking about it. People think about assets differently. So yeah, that is a way to amplify your returns on top of using leverage. That's pretty interesting to me. And it's obvious that it works. Like, I just did that. So if you want to try this platform out, there's a link to Margex underneath the video. That's kind of how I'm approaching trading. I think that there's still a lot of potential. I want to be able to take profits though. This has been such a long period of just sideways consolidation. I do think there's going to be a big move here soon, and I think you want to put in your positions before it's too late, but you also want to be careful that if we have another downwick, you don't get liquidated. That's the key. You want to remain solvent in this space. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. Check out the link underneath the video to Margex. I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.